Hi, everybody. I know it.
You got
You
it.
can do it like that.
He's got it. He's got it.
Hi, everybody. Those are my guys. Hello. My name is Nikki, and today I want to talk to you about substance abuse recovery and accountability. Being that I'm in recovery myself, I want to mention some of the basic prerequisites to a potentially successful program. One of the major misconceptions in recovery is that people can be convinced that they need help. I'm here to tell you that there has to be a real desire to change. Lip service will not cut it. Another misconception is that people struggling with addiction just need a program. I'm not saying that people struggling with addiction don't need a program. A program can be exactly what a person needs to get help. However, a program in and of itself can't save anyone. According to the Partnership of Drug-Free Kids website, 23 million Americans are currently addicted to alcohol and other drugs. And only 1 out of 10 of them, 1 out of 10 million receives treatment that they need. This leaves 20 million Americans without treatment. Before I get into some of the information about recovery and recovery-related subjects, it should be known that programs, steps, and processes of methodology aren't necessary for someone to get sober. People every day make a conscious decision to stop using drugs or alcohol. However, I want to talk to you about a few principles that you may already be familiar with, or at least have heard of. These steps and principles have been taken from AA and Celebrate Recovery. When it comes to really seeking help, an individual has to be willing to come out of denial. Many people think that denial is not realizing that there's a problem or how serious a problem really is. And this is true. But denial is much more than this. Denial is knowing that there's a problem and refusing to do anything about it. Denial is denying a solution to the problem. Denial is knowing the truth and refusing to believe it. According to the 9th edition psychology book by David Myers, in recent pop psychology, the supposedly irresistible seductions of addiction have been extended to cover many behaviors formerly considered bad habits and, yes, even sins. Fancy that. I really believe that there is no real freedom, whether it be from addiction or any other life-controlling issues apart from God. The first step in freedom is realizing we're not God, and that apart from Him, we're powerless over addictions and life-controlling issues. In John 14:6, Jesus says, I'm the way, I'm the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The next step is to earnestly believe that God exists, that we matter to Him, and that He has the power alone to help us recover. Now, when I say earnestly believe, this means to excessively or fanatically believe. Believing is not just agreeing that something is true or fact, but it's to be committed to what you say you agree is true. I can agree all day long that drugs are bad for me, but if I'm still doing them, then somewhere in my belief system, I'm believing they're either going to make me feel better or that they're going to make me better. Just as I can agree all day long, God can help me. But if I don't commit myself to seeking God for help, then nothing changes. And if nothing changes, then nothing changes. And once again, lip service triumphs. This leads me into the next step, which is choosing to commit all of my life to the will of God. This is surrendering every area of your life over to God. Addiction, finances, jobs, relationships, and yes, even our children. Lastly, as far as the steps are concerned, a moral and fearless inventory needs to be made. This is considered to be one of the hardest and most uncomfortable steps. It's because it requires a real transparency that can be uncomfortable. It requires an individual to expose themselves and the hurt that they've caused not only themselves, but everybody else in their addiction. It requires an individual to confess all their faults to God and to someone else. Now, it is absolutely possible for someone struggling with addiction to get sober without a program. However, if a program is what an individual needs, there's a few things one might consider. You might want to consider a program that's a year or longer. And you may want to consider committing to a program where you and the staff is willing to hold you back and not just push you through and give you a certificate at the end. Programs where staff and other students are willing to hold you accountable. Now, one of the things that I've learned about accountability is you will only be held accountable if you want to be. If you have an accountability partner, it is not their job to hold you accountable. It's your job to make sure that they're holding you accountable. Allowing another individual who has lived in addiction but is now experiencing real long-term freedom and sobriety is an individual you want to allow to have complete and full access to all your thoughts, your doubts, your fears, your failures. It's in one's best interest to give this person full permission to tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear. Finding this person may not be easy. You may have to shop around a little bit. One of the biggest dangers in recovery is having an accountability partner that co-signs your behaviors that are rationalization and justification type attitudes. This is an area one must be intentional about choosing someone that's not going to enable them and that is willing to speak the truth in love. When working a program, you need to be willing to have a good attitude and be willing to be teachable. You need to be willing to hear correction and what the leadership or your accountability partner has to say. You need to be willing to have your thinking, your thoughts, your attitude, and your behaviors and belief systems not only challenged, but changed. If you are unwilling to hear correction and earnestly seek God for direction, you just may find yourself in dysfunction again. Having a good attitude is one of the most important things that you will need to help maintain your recovery. Otherwise, you will never be able to submit yourself to a tough process like the one that I've been talking about, and you'll never be able to submit yourself to God. It's inevitable. A good and teachable attitude is a sure way to not experience real freedom. And I'm here to tell you that if you want to experience real freedom, you need to submit yourself not only to the process, but to the people that are allowed to have access into your life. To be successful at working a program, you will need to give an account of your life and the choices that you've made. You must be willing to be challenged in every area of your life and stop living in denial and come into the light. You need to be willing to be challenged on all your decisions that you've made in your jobs, your relationships, your finances, your workplace. And above all else, you need to learn to communicate with God. Communicating with God is one of the most important things that we could possibly do in our recovery. We need to develop a relationship with God and have communion with God. We need to hear from God. And we need to hear truth from other people, but ultimately we need to hear truth from the source of truth, and that's Jesus. We need to hear from God, and we need to have a conversation with him, and not just a one-sided conversation, but a two-sided conversation where we're talking to God and he's talking back. One of the best ways to do this is through a process called journaling. Journaling is a written, recorded prayer on paper. Journaling is an amazing way to hear from God and to learn his character and nature. Journaling is tangible and can be reflected on, which is important when determining what God sounds like as opposed to what the voice of self sounds like. In doing so, there are some very important biblical principles that need to be followed to determine whether or not you're hearing from God and not just making things up. I know that this may sound foreign to some. It was foreign to me when I first heard of it. Giving thanks, confessing, and receiving forgiveness for sin is crucial, not only for recovery, but for life. Asking God on paper how he feels and what he thinks about you is an amazing way to start knowing and understanding the nature of God. Now, your relationship with God is just like any other relationship. It takes time, it takes work, and it takes effort on your part. And here's what I've learned about this, is God's going to do his part, which means you have to do your part. He's not going to do yours. Of course, this needs to be reconciled to the Bible and cannot go against Scripture. Hearing and getting direction from God is an amazing way to walk out recovery and walk out life. Finally, to conclude, there must be a real desire to change and a commitment to follow some simple but difficult steps. Be teachable and be willing to hear correction. Believe and trust in God and learn to hear his voice and follow him. Good programs can be a great way for people to get the help that they need. But at the end of the day, there is really only one step, and that is to submit to Jesus. Lip service will not cut it. Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice, and they hear me, and they follow me." Thanks again for watching. See you next time.